Hello everybody, welcome to part 2 of how to answer a literature extract question for CIE 0475 literature paper 3, and we are going to be looking at the play A Raisin in the Sun. Okay, so let's have a look at what we covered last lesson. So last lesson we looked at the question, the extract, and we decided what it was that we wanted to say about how Hansberry makes this such an engaging moment. So engaging was the focus, and that's what helped us really to make our selections as we move through the extract. At this point, we've got an array of different evidence that we could use, that we might use, and we still have some evidence that maybe we won't use. We've looked at different techniques or dramatic devices, remember, because this is a play, that we can comment on. And we made some notes on how we can analyse. So remember, I modelled how you can annotate the extract as you go through, just to kind of give yourself something to say later on when you start to write up your essay. And we ended with a clear plan. So the clear plan is necessary in order to give your writing some structure, in order to make sure that your ideas are coherent. So let's just go through a quick recap of what you are being tested on again, just because all of these are massively important when you start to write up your essay. So first of all, we have AO1 and AO2, and what we really want to be showing here when we write up our essay is that we've got a very good understanding of the characters, which in this instance is Walter and Mama. We want to show that we've got a good understanding of their relationship, of what is happening, that we're able to select a variety of different quotations to back up our ideas, and that we're able to infer and interpret meaning. AO3 is all about how. This is to do with your techniques here. So last lesson I spoke to you about the various techniques that you can comment on for a play, and we call those dramatic devices. So we want to be looking at how events, characters and relationships are presented. What choices does Hansberry make? Why does she make these choices? What is her intention? And finally, AO4, which is really just about how you write up your answers. It's how you present your ideas in a coherent and relevant way, but also how you are developing a personal response. How are you responding to the quotations that you choose? How are you interpreting them? How are you making inferences? And what is it that you want to say about how characters or events or relationships are presented and why? So here's just a quick checklist based upon the different assessment objectives that we're being tested on. So make sure that throughout your answer you do have relevant points that show that you've got a good understanding of what you're talking about. Selection of evidence, quotations that support your points. Reference to techniques or dramatic devices, please name them and then talk about the effect. You could also talk about language choice, so maybe a particular word stands out for you and you think it's important and you want to analyse the connotations. Analysis and interpretation of techniques, dramatic devices and language. Try and do this as much as you can throughout your answer, and it's fine to have more than one interpretation. I like to call that layering the meaning. So if you have an interpretation and then say, in addition, it could also suggest, or on the other hand, then you are just adding layers to your response. Write it intention. Why does she do what she does? What does she want you to think? What does she want you to understand? And you can at times link this back to the context. Like I said in part 1, please don't just bolt on contextual information. It must support what you're already saying. It must tie in to a point that you're trying to make. Okay, so let's just remind ourselves of the plan that we ended with last lesson. So this plan came out of all of the different things that I'd highlighted throughout the extract, and all I did is I just made a quick note of everything that I noticed. So these are all of the things that I did notice, but at this point in the exam I'm going to look back at this and I'm going to decide, okay, how am I going to pick the specific points on here that I'm going to talk about? Which of these maybe do I want to push to the side? Which am I not going to mention? And what I really want is I want points. So I want points that will start off the paragraph. So if you're used to writing a P paragraph or a P paragraph, then I'm referring to the P there. So what is your initial point in relation to the question, which is, again, is how does Hansberry make this such an engaging moment in the play? And if you have a look at all of these notes that I've made, a lot of them are actually to do with the methods A lot of them are dramatic devices. And the one that really stands out for me is relationships, because we could actually use relationships as a way of answering this question. So she makes this an engaging moment in the play by showing us the different relationships. So I quite like this point. So what I'm going to do now with my plan is I'm going to select this point, and I am going to then use the rest of these to support this. And I will start to make a more detailed plan, and I'm going to say maybe 3 different things about relationships, but I'm going to use some of these notes that I've already made because they can help me with the how. So for example, change in mood and emotion. That definitely shows me something about relationships. So maybe that's one of the first things that I will say, is that relationships are presented through a change in mood and emotion. Stage directions definitely shows us something about relationships. Stage directions, as I mentioned in lesson 1, they reveal something important about character, about action, relationships, feelings. So that's something that I'm going to use as my how to support my points in relationships. And finally, length of speech. So we did speak a lot about the length of speech from Walter at the beginning and then from Mama towards the end of the extract, and I think that does stand out, so I would like to focus on that, and I'm going to see if I can somehow link length of speech back to my initial idea of relationships. So I'm going to get rid of the rest because I no longer need them. So if you're in the exam and you're scribbling your answers down on a piece of paper, then just cross them out so you don't get confused, so you know which ones you're not going to use and which ones you are going to use. What I do need to remember at this stage is my what and my how. So my what is my point. So what do I learn about this extract? Well, I do learn something about relationships, and I do learn something about how the mood and emotion changes. And I'm going to have to focus on, well, how? How do I know the mood and the emotion changes? And that's where I'm going to try and use some of these devices over here. If I'm going to be looking at stage directions, then I need to be very specific about what is shown through the stage direction. If I'm saying that stage directions somehow tell me something about relationships, what specifically do they show? And the same for length of speech. What does it show? If somebody speaks for a long time, what does it show? If somebody speaks for a short time, what does it show? If this flips and different people speak for a long time, what does that show? So notice how I'm constantly trying to ask myself these how and these what questions, because they will really help you to not only develop your answer, but to ensure that it's relevant, that it's coherent, and that you are producing an essay that flows and that always links back to the question, and as well links back to the dramatic devices that have been used. Okay, so bearing in mind that I've just spoken to you about the what and the how, this is just something that I use in my classes just to remind them how important it is to go through this process of the what, the how and the why. And if you are used to using Peel in your lessons, you'll actually recognise that this kind of does follow the Peel structure anyway. So for the what you learn, what you stand out, this then will formulate your point, which is your P. So for example, this is something that you could say about the what. In this extract, we see a strained relationship. Okay, so what do I see? I see a strained relationship. That's my point. Or Hansberry presents a relationship that is strained or is complex. Again, that is my point. Then you move on to what is your evidence? What quotation are you going to use to back this up? Then you move on to your how, which is all about techniques. So if this is my point, in the extract we see a strained relationship, then the next question that I'm going to ask myself is, well, how do I know this? How is it shown to me? This is where you must focus on your techniques or your dramatic devices. So maybe you want to say that we see a strained relationship, and this relationship is presented through the use of interruptions or the use of dashes. So just make sure that you are moving through this in this particular order. Sometimes you will go back and forth between your how and your what, depending on how long your paragraph is or how many quotations you have. But you must remember to try and focus on each of them. And the last one, why? This is to do with your author intention, but it's also to do with the effect on the audience. So why is it shown in this way? How are we supposed to feel? What are we supposed to think? What does Hansberry want us to understand? So try and write these down in your exam just to remind you, just at the top of your paper on a bit of scrap paper, write down what, how and why, and just keep going back to this. Every time you start a new paragraph or a new section of your essay, quickly go back and just check, Have I specifically said what I learn? Have I then said how I learn it? Have I commented on a technique? Have I then gone to why? What is the effect? What am I supposed to understand? Okay, so here is my more detailed plan. So I've taken these ideas and I've taken the idea of relationships, and this would probably take you maybe 5 minutes in the exam just to jot something down, and that actually gives you a bit more direction for when you start writing your essay. Now, it doesn't have to be in full sentences, it doesn't even have to be as detailed as I've made it here, but this is for you to understand. So I've tried to make it a little bit more coherent than maybe what I would do if I was writing my own very quick notes in an exam. So if you can see, I've aimed for 3 points here, 3 paragraphs or 3 sections of my essay. It may be that due to timing, I only get to number 2, but I'm going to plan for a third just in case. So remember, you have 45 minutes for this part of the exam. So you may spend about 15 minutes planning and going through your extract, but that may sometimes go to 20. And that would then leave you with 25 minutes to write up your answer. So ideally you want about 30 minutes, but if you're cutting it a bit fine, if you've got 25 minutes, then you should be able to still cover 3 points, but at a bare minimum you will definitely get 2 in there. So my first point, the extract is initially controlled by Walter and the relationship seems strained. Now notice how I've decided that my focus for this essay is going to be relationships. You may not decide to do it that way. If, for example, if you've watched my separate piece lessons, you'll notice that actually that one wasn't constructed in the same way. It just depends what the extract shows. If you see a pattern, I can see a pattern of relationships, and I know already how important Walter and Mama's relationship is. So this is why I've decided to focus everything I say on relationships. You may decide to do it differently, and you may actually decide to have 3 different things that you are going to focus on, and that is absolutely fine. So my first what? I've got my keyword here, the relationship, because this is what I'm going to say ultimately in my introduction. And my point, my personal response is that it's controlled by him. That's my interpretation, but also that I think it seems strained. And this is what the examiners mean by a personal response for AO4. What do you see? What do you think? What do you understand? Now my how, which refers to the techniques or the dramatic devices. Now this is where these come in. So these are the ones that I also decided to keep because I actually think that these all feed back into relationships. So how do I know the things that I've set up here? Well, I know it's strained because he's got a very long, rambling speech at the beginning, which is full of dashes. So this shows that maybe he's full of emotion, he can't control himself. The relationship is no longer on an equal footing as we've seen it before. It's not so much of a back and forth conversation. He very much dominates at the beginning. And he speaks the most, so he's definitely in control. So here I'm commenting on length of speech, but I may also go into mood and emotion because I want to say how it is at the beginning. If you are going to talk about a change in something, then obviously you are going to have to talk about it at 2 different points. So my second idea here is my second what? A change in mood when Mama resumes control of the relationship. So we see this change in mood, and again I've got my keyword relationship. How do I know there's a change in mood? How do I know she takes back control of the relationship? Well, it's because she speaks for the most. So she then takes over that conversation and she speaks for probably about as long as Walter speaks when the extract begins. So here I'm going back to the dramatic device of length of speech, but I'm also going to add in that stage directions also show her emotion, because I want to comment on mood, emotion, where we've got up here the point from the last slide. And stage directions, again, it's a dramatic device, so I'm talking about method. And the last one, I want to talk about how I see that there is a positive relationship at the end. How do I know there is a positive relationship again? And it's through the repetition of words between them. So if you did look at the lesson for part 1, you would have seen that we commented on the fact that they repeat the word wrong between each other, but they also repeat the word trust. So I'm going to focus on this repetition of words as my method. Okay, so now we have a plan. All I really need to do is to write this up into paragraphs. So in order to write your answer up into paragraphs or sections, I like to ask my students to follow a paragraph pyramid. It's just about building upon your ideas and trying to take them as far as you possibly can. So again, we start with a clear point, what you see. Then we move on to the evidence, so which quotation backs up your point. It can be very, very easy in an exam situation to completely forget the evidence. So just remember that this is the next kind of building block that you do need. Then you've got your first response to the evidence. So initially, what do you see? What do you think is shown to you? And then you can comment on what you think is suggested or implied. Then try and develop a second response. Now, this is where we're really trying to layer our interpretation. We're trying to build upon what we're saying to show that we can say multiple things or we can see multiple meanings. So possibly develop by layering your analysis. So maybe you say more than one thing about a word or word choice. You may talk about multiple connotations, or you may talk about different ways in which you can interpret a dash, for example. Or you may decide to double up on techniques. So maybe you want to comment on a dash, but you also want to comment on the words that are separated by that dash. So therefore you're commenting on punctuation, but you're also commenting on language. Also try and use some phrases to help you. So if you notice, I often put a lot of phrases here just to help you with your academic writing. It also forces you to say something else. So if you put in the word furthermore, then you're forcing yourself to add something, but you're also letting the examiner know that you're going to add in different interpretation. And the last, try and develop further. And this is where you maybe focus on your why. So what is the writer intention? Why did she do whatever it is that you said that she did up here? Why is it that she included these techniques that you've commented on here? Why did she include this particular word or phrase? And what does she want you to understand? The effect on the reader or the audience. How are we supposed to feel? What are we supposed to think? How are we supposed to view these characters? Context, if it's relevant. And again, try and use some words and phrases to help you develop your response. Okay, so let's just do a quick example of the depth that you can go into just with one quotation. So I'm going to focus on my initial point from a couple of slides ago. So what I learn is the extract is initially controlled by Walter and the relationship seems strained. That will effectively be my point. Now the quotation that I would choose for this is this one by Walter, where he says, "Mama, you don't know all the things a man what got leisure can find to do in this city." So the first thing we want to do is we've included the evidence and now we want to talk about a technique or dramatic device that we see. So the first thing that stands out is a dash. So I'm going to say that a dash is here, but then you want to actually comment on why the dash has been used. So you could say, okay, well, the dash suggests division between them. Like it physically divides or cuts the line. So we could say that actually this is symbolic of the divide between mother and son at this stage. Then we want to try and develop that interpretation further. Let's say something else. Let's try and layer. Could say that it reveals his struggle to express his ideas, but once he begins, he then can't control them, because we know that this is actually from that long speech that he gives at the beginning, where he is like he can't control what he's saying and all of the words just tumble out of his mouth. And notice as we do this that I'm trying to use these key words that I've given myself over here. So we've got suggests, we have revealed, and again, this is the academic language that I've just mentioned to you. Try and use these words to develop your interpretation. And this is where we're going to see if we can develop even further by maybe doubling up. So we've spoken about dashes, but can we double up and maybe comment on language? And this is where you would look and you would say, okay, is there any word or phrase that stands out to me? If there's not, don't worry, you don't have to do this every single time. But if there is, then just think, okay, what can I say about that particular word? And what stands out for me is this word. It's mama. And the reason why it stands out is because of the placement. Now remember that you can also talk about structure. It doesn't just mean the structure of the extract, but it can be structure of sentences or clauses within a sentence. So it begins with the word mama. So then you want to ask yourself, why? And we could say that it shows that he's demanding her attention. He wants her to look at him or acknowledge him. Also shows that he's taking control of the conversation. Again, because it's demanding. And it also could seem as if he's pleading. Now here what we have is we have multiple different interpretations to show the examiner that you can think on different levels and you can consider various different meanings. So maybe it is that he's pleading with her to listen. Maybe it shows his desperation. And then finally, we want to make sure that we are linking it to the question. So we could argue here that it engages the audience as it creates tension. And then you would expand upon that and explain why you think it creates tension at this particular point. Okay, so let's look at an example. So we have our checklist from the beginning of the lesson here, and these are all the different things that you do want to try and show throughout your essay. And it's a good idea for you to try and make your own checklist that you can remember and to just jot it down on a scrap piece of paper in your exam and actually physically tick it off as you go so you can keep a track of what you have done. Now we have the relevant points. Now if you notice, I've colour coordinated these, or I've underlined, or I've highlighted, because I actually want you to see where you find them in the example. So relevant point, but also every time that you show understanding, this is going to be in red. Consistent focus on the question, and notice how I've said consistent, because you do want to try and return to the question, not in every sentence, then it would get boring and repetitive, but you want to kind of refer to it throughout, even if you don't always say the word engage, but you say a synonym of the word engage. Evidence, so we're going to underline the evidence here just so you can see where it is. Technique or dramatic device is going to be in purple. Any comment on language is going to be in yellow, and any analysis and interpretation is going to be in green. You can probably already see there's an awful lot of green, which just goes to show how much you should be saying about the evidence that you choose. Effect on the audience is going to be in italics, and writer intention and context are going to be highlighted in these different colours. Now, added extras, you do not have to really focus on these in your checklist, but they are things that you should consider as you're working through your essay. So I did just mention academic phrases, so it'd be great if you could remember a few academic phrases and just include those. Connectives massively help to show the direction of your essay. They also help you to build upon and link ideas. And linking phrases between your paragraphs sometimes can help with how coherent your essay is, and it does definitely help with your AO4. So just have a look out for these and just think about when you see them, how often you see them, and whereabouts they are. Okay, so this is a very small introduction. If you don't have time for an introduction, don't worry, but you probably could have time for a couple of sentences that really just include Hansberry's name, the keyword from the question, and just give a very brief overview of what's important in terms of the extract. So in this introduction, we have in this extract, Hansberry engages, so notice how we have question here, the audience through a description of the relationship between Mama and Walter. So now the examiner knows that I am just going to talk about the relationship. This is going to be my focus. They also know that I've gotten a good understanding of the characters and the focus of this particular extract. The relationship initially presented by Hansberry appears strained, and both Mama and Walter are obviously troubled. So not only does it show understanding, but actually it shows my own personal interpretation as well. Hansberry effectively shows the strength of this relationship as the characters are reunited by the end of the extract, and the mood is more positive. So notice how I'm repeating here my own key word. This is what I'm going to speak about, and I'm just repeating it just to kind of solidify this idea, not only in my own essay, but for the examiner. So the extract begins, so if you did watch the separate piece example that I did speak about moving through the extract chronologically. Sometimes that can help you just to keep your ideas ordered. So the first thing that we actually do see is this long speech. So I want the examiner to know, yeah, I understand the structure, I know where it's from. So the extract begins with a long speech. So here we have our technique or dramatic device already, so I've already got a mark for that. It's from Walter, which shows that he is dominating the conversation. So here again, developing my own ideas and my own personal interpretation here. The speech is long and rambling, which shows just how strained their relationship is. So here I'm showing that I understand not only their relationship, but I understand Walter, and I also understand this technique and what it shows. Even though he addresses Mama, he clearly doesn't require a response from her. Walter begins his outburst by declaring. Now, notice how just before the quotation is included, it's introduced and embedded. Now, it's better if you don't just start a sentence with a quotation. So to introduce it, you usually say who is talking, who they're talking to. You can say where they are, if it's necessary, why they're saying it, the tone, just so it's clear the context of this particular quotation. So Walter begins his outburst by declaring, "Mama, you don't know all the things a man what got leisure can find to do in this city." The use of a dash. So here we've gone back to technique or dramatic device. So I'm now focusing on something specific here. Could suggest, now if you notice all of this green here is my analysis and interpretation. So see if you can see how often I offer another layer or a different aspect of this interpretation. It could suggest the division that exists between them as they're effectively divided by the dash in this speech. The dash also results in a pause. So notice I'm already on my second piece of analysis. It suggests a division, but it can also reinforce the idea that they're currently unable to reach each other. So I'm offering multiple interpretations here. So in addition, so we've gone back to the connectives, the use of a dash is particularly powerful. So here we have an academic phrase as well, in revealing the struggle he is undergoing in order to express and explain himself. So we kind of got our third interpretation here. Furthermore, the fact that his speech begins with mama. So here we've gone to language, which means that we're actually doubling up on our techniques because we did start off with a dash. Shows that he's demanding her attention and taking control of the relationship. So here we have a focus back to the point that I made initially, shows that everything I'm saying is relevant, and taking control of the relationship that the audience see on stage. So just making sure the examiner is aware that yes, I do know that this is set on stage, I do know that there is an audience, and I do know that we are watching this. The use of her name also could represent his desperation. So we have another interpretation here, as it almost seems as if he is pleading with her. Now, not all of these ideas were on the initial plan that I made when I had the quotation in the middle of the slide. So it's a good idea to have that kind of annotation actually on the extract, and then all you're doing is you're pulling your ideas out and you're putting them in full sentences. This sense of desperation displayed by Walter effectively engages the audience. So here now we've got not only the key word from the question, but we've got effect on the audience. As Hansberry powerfully presents us, so it's always good to keep using the author or the writer, playwright's name. So we have the writer's intention here. Hansberry powerfully presents us with a vulnerable Walter. So she's trying to present Walter as vulnerable to us. This is what she wants us to see. Who is struggling not only with his inner turmoil, but the relationships he has with those he's closest to. Shows that I have got a good understanding of the character and the relationships, but also I know what she's attempting to show us. Okay, so I would like you to have a look at the second part of this essay. Now, I'm not going to go through it in as much detail as I did the first one, because actually I'd like to see if you can do that as well. So just pause the video and have a look and just see what you can actually notice. So just go through these various parts of the essay and just see what stands out for you. Also pay particular attention to these extras, just to see if we can notice how the essay uses these. So just have a pause, read through it, and then see what you notice. Okay, so hopefully you've had a chance to have a read through the second section of this essay, and hopefully you've managed to notice most of these, if not all of these. But also what I really wanted to draw your attention to was some of these academic phrases and linking phrases. So here we have the initial point. As the extract progresses, so here we're talking about structure, we see a change in mood as the speech of the characters shift. So this is my initial point. Now notice how within this paragraph I come back to this. The change in mood is further highlighted. So here we have a linking phrase. So I'm linking back to my initial point to show that everything that I'm saying is linked together, or it's developing. Notice how we also again have the use of connectives to show that we're adding our ideas, or we're adding analysis, or adding interpretation, but also the use of academic phrases. It's not just about putting the academic phrases in, but it's also about what they help you to do. So whenever you see an academic phrase, just look at the full sentence. Think about how it sounds, but also think about how those phrases are helping you to develop your own ideas and interpretation. So here we've got Hansberry's choice. And this goes back to method, but it also goes back to author intention. Because again, we want to keep using her name because we want to show that we understand this play was created by somebody and these decisions were made by somebody for a particular effect. Creates the impression, it's a good phrase to use, and particularly powerful. It shows opinion here, but it also shows that you understand how an effect is created. Okay, so this is the final section of the essay. So this is the part that I would like you to look at yourself. And I'm just going to leave you with this last section and just see what you can gather as you go through and you read and see how much of these different features that you can actually see. So pause the lesson, have a read through and see how this compares to the first 2 paragraphs of the essay. Okay, so here are the final tips that I'd like to leave you with. So as you can probably see from the example, clear points are a must, in chronological order if possible. So from reading the answer on the previous slide, you'll see that most of it is in chronological order. It doesn't have to be, but it definitely is going to help you if you are just moving through that extract in chronological order. It stops you becoming confused, but it also maybe helps you to talk about how things are developing and changing. Choosing interesting and relevant quotations got to be relevant to not only the question, but your initial point. And it has to be interesting, otherwise you will have nothing to say. Use of keyword in the question throughout or synonyms. Name and analyse the techniques or dramatic devices. So it's not good enough merely just to name them, but you must talk about why they've been used and what the effect is. Analysis of language choice whenever you can. Link back to Hansberry's message and intention. Link to the effect on the reader or the audience in this case. What are we supposed to think, feel? Use of context if it supports and enhances your ideas. So from this particular example, you'll notice that there was really only one reference to context, and that was to do with Walter's racial and economic placement in society. And it's okay for you not to bolt context onto every single point that you make. You should show that you have an awareness of the context and maybe how that adds to meaning, but please don't include it just for the sake of including it. And academic phrases just to help you develop your response. So thank you very much for taking part in this lesson. Please look out for the next one, which is going to be how to answer the full play question, which is the second option that you have on this paper. Thank you very much. Goodbye.